The darkness of space had always been vast, endless, and indifferent. It did not care for the wars waged within it, the empires that rose and crumbled, or the species that fought for dominance among the stars. But on this day, the void bore witness to something it had never seen before, something that would change the course of galactic history forever. A single warship, gliding through the abyss with an eerie sense of purpose. The HSV Revenant. It was not a fleet. It was not an armada. It was one ship that had the power to shatter an empire. And it was coming. Across the Dominion's central worlds, panic began to spread. The Galactic Dominion had ruled unchallenged for over 3,000 years. They had crushed rebellions, exterminated species, and rewritten history with their iron grip. No power had dared to stand against them. No species had ever survived long enough to attempt it, until now. The Revenant wasn't an ordinary warship. It wasn't just another vessel patrolling the void. It was a message, one forged in fire, blood, and vengeance. It was the culmination of centuries of exile, oppression, and human resilience. The Dominion had banished humanity long ago, thinking them a primitive, unworthy species, better left to die in the cold emptiness beyond the galactic core. But the humans had survived. And worse for the Dominion, they had evolved. Inside the Dominion's high command citadel, chaos erupted as the intelligence reports flooded in. This must be a mistake, one of the Dominion's highest-ranking strategists growled, his claws tapping against the sleek surface of the war table. His name was Admiral Vokrath, a veteran of countless conquests, a being whose very presence struck fear into lesser races. No single warship, no matter how advanced, would dare approach Dominion space alone. Yet the holographic projection before him told a different story. Admiral. One of his aides hesitated, her scaled fingers trembling over the data. Readouts. The ship's energy output. It's beyond anything we've ever encountered. Vokrath narrowed his slit pupil eyes. How powerful? The answer came with a whisper. Enough to annihilate entire planets. A hush fell over the war room. The Dominion had assumed humans were weak, barely worth conquering when they were. First encountered centuries ago. Their homeworld, Earth, had been labeled an insignificant backwater, a planet filled with short-lived creatures barely capable of interstellar travel. So, the Dominion had given them an ultimatum. Serve, or be erased. Humanity had refused. A war had followed. A brutal, merciless campaign that lasted only a handful of years. The Dominion, with its superior numbers and overwhelming fleets, had crushed every human resistance. Their cities burned, their colonies were bombarded into dust, and their fleets were scattered across the stars. And in the final act of cruelty, the Dominion banished humanity to the void, pushing them into the uncharted blackness beyond civilized space. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. For centuries, humanity had disappeared, vanishing into the cold, empty void beyond the Dominion's borders. They had been presumed extinct, or at best, reduced to wandering nomads, scavenging in the darkness. The Dominion had never once considered the other possibility. That humanity had spent every moment of exile preparing for their return, and now, after centuries of silence, their answer had come in the form of a single warship, cutting through Dominion space like a blade through flesh. The Revenant was unstoppable. At the Dominion's outermost defensive lines, a fleet of over 500 warships had been assembled to intercept the approaching vessel. They outnumbered the human ship by an overwhelming margin. To them, this wasn't just a battle, it was an execution. The Dominion's Grand Admiral, Tovnok, a being who had orchestrated the destruction of over 47 species, watched the approaching vessel from the bridge of his command, Dreadnought. His fleet was the first line of defense for the Dominion's homeworld. Aboard his flagship, he stared at the holographic projection of the human warship. His mandibles clicked in irritation. One ship, he muttered, barely able to believe. The absurdity. One ship against my fleet? The bridge officers around him chuckled, their confidence unshaken. This will be over in minutes, Grand Admiral. One of them smirked. We will wipe these creatures from existence. A transmission was sent to the human warship. It was a final warning, a demand for surrender. The response? Silence. Then, Without any further communication, the Revenant fired. There was no warning shot, no delay, no hesitation. The first blast ripped through the void like a god's wrath. The lead Dominion battleship didn't just explode, it ceased to exist. The sheer force of the weapon ripped it apart at a molecular level, vaporizing its crew in an instant. Before the Dominion fleet could react, the second shot came, then a third, then a fourth. Each impact erased a warship from existence. Shields, armor, and defensive measures. None of them mattered. The Revenant was not just attacking, it was erasing. Grand. Admiral Tovnok's confidence shattered as his fleet crumbled before his very eyes. "What is happening?" he roared, his mandibles clicking in panic. "Raise shields! Fire everything!" And they did. The Dominion fleet unleashed a storm of firepower. Thousands of energy bolts, high-yield torpedoes, plasma lances, enough firepower to incinerate entire moons, hurtled toward the Revenant. But it was pointless. The Revenant's defensive AI activated. Every incoming projectile was neutralized before it could even reach the ship's hull. Some were intercepted by countermeasures, some were redirected back at the attackers, and others simply vanished, as if space itself had swallowed them whole. For the first time in Dominion history, their might meant nothing. Within minutes, half of the Dominion fleet had been obliterated. The Revenant wasn't just fighting, it was executing a calculated extermination. And the worst part? It was still advancing. The Dominion fleet was burning. What had once been an unshakable wall of warships, 500 vessels strong, was now a graveyard of debris. Explosions rippled through the void as shattered dreadnoughts and battleships drifted lifelessly, their hulls torn apart by weapons no one had ever seen before. Aboard the Dominion's flagship, Grand Admiral Tovnok stood frozen, his mandibles twitching in disbelief. This was impossible. His fleet was supposed to be invincible. This was the First Armada, the elite defensive force of the Dominion's inner systems, and yet, in less than 15 minutes, over half of his warships were gone. Tovnok gripped the war table, his claws carving deep grooves into the reinforced alloy. His officers were in absolute panic, their voices a cacophony of frantic screams as they struggled to regain control of the situation. "Admiral, shields are failing. The enemy's energy output is off the charts. We've lost 3 more dreadnoughts. That thing is ripping through our defenses like they don't exist. All countermeasures have failed. Our weapons, our defenses, nothing is working." The Revenant was still coming. Its black hull was barely scratched. Every attack the Dominion launched was neutralized, as if the human warship had stepped out of some nightmare realm where the very laws of warfare had been rewritten. Tovnok turned toward his chief weapons officer, his voice dangerously low. "Focus all remaining firepower on that ship. I don't care if we burn every single reactor in this fleet down to slag. We destroy that thing now." The Dominion's surviving warships obeyed. Over 100 vessels, cruisers, battleships, dreadnoughts, aligned their weapon arrays and unleashed everything they had. Plasma lances, torpedo barrages, dark matter destabilizers, high-yield antimatter, warheads. An unrelenting maelstrom of destruction was hurled toward the Revenant, a wall of fire and fury capable of obliterating an entire planetary system. Tovnok watched with wide, desperate eyes. No ship could survive that. Not even a god could withstand that level of firepower. Then the Revenant vanished. For a fraction of a second, it simply wasn't there. The weapons passed through empty space, detonating harmlessly into the void. And then, it reappeared. Not damaged, not struggling, not even phased. Tovnok felt a chill crawl through his exoskeleton. Warp technology? Phase shifting? Temporal displacement? What the hell was this ship? And then, the Revenant spoke. A transmission cut through every Dominion frequency. A voice, cold and calculated, filled the bridge of every surviving warship. "To the Dominion Armada. This is Commander Elias Kane of the Revenant." The voice was human, not desperate, not angry. Just calm, inevitable. "You have already lost." Tovnok's blood ran cold. No threats, no demands. Just a statement of fact. And then, the killing began in earnest. The Revenant fired again, and this time, it unleashed hell. The true might of the Revenant. The Dominion's warships didn't just explode, they ceased to exist in a way that defied logic. Some ships were torn apart by energy waves that seemed to peel reality itself away, reducing them to nothingness. Others were folded inward, their hulls crumpling like they had been crushed by the hand of a god. Dominion crew members screamed, in horror as they witnessed weapons that should not exist. Tovnok's own ship shook violently as the Revenant's next attack pierced straight through their shields like paper. "We've lost reactor control," someone screamed. "Gravity systems failing, hull integrity at 15%, we're breaking apart." The Grand Admiral refused to accept this. "Prepare a full retreat," he roared, his voice raw with desperation. "Pull back to the homeworld, now!" His officers scrambled to comply, but it was too late. The Revenant's final shot lanced through his command ship, spearing straight through the bridge with surgical precision. Tovnok had only enough time to realize what had happened before the void consumed him. The First Armada was gone. The capital reacts across the Dominion's central homeworld. High Command was in chaos. Every transmission, every incoming report, they all carried the same message. A single human warship had annihilated their most powerful fleet. Inside the Dominion's war chambers, Supreme Chancellor Zarvoth watched the data streams in stunned silence. He was the highest authority in the Dominion, a ruler feared across the stars. His empire had stood for over 3 millennia, unchallenged and unrivaled, until today. "Their technology is beyond anything we've ever seen," one of his advisors muttered, trembling. Zarvoth exhaled slowly. "It's not just the technology." His claws flexed against the armrest of his throne. "It's their intent." The Revenant hadn't just attacked the Dominion. It had delivered a message. Humanity had returned, and they were here for vengeance. The Chancellor turned to his generals. "Deploy the core defense fleets. Prepare the planetary shields. Mobilize every warship we have." His voice was steady, but deep inside, he knew the truth. This wasn't a war. This was a reckoning. The Dominion homeworld, Varalos Prime, was a fortress. For centuries, it had remained the unshakable heart of the Dominion Empire, its skies patrolled by thousands of warships, its orbital defenses woven into an impenetrable web of firepower. No enemy had ever reached its surface, no fleet had ever dared to challenge its might, until today. As the Revenant emerged from the depths of space, approaching the Dominion's capital world, the planetary defense network activated in full force. 40,000 orbital guns, planetary shields thick enough to withstand supernova shockwaves, and a fleet numbering in the tens of thousands. This was the Dominion's last line of defense. And yet, inside the war chambers of High Command, fear had already taken hold. The final line of defense, Supreme Chancellor Zarvoth, stood before a massive holographic display, his clawed fingers gripping the edges of the command table. Before him, the Revenant's approach was displayed in real time. His top generals and admirals surrounded him, their faces grim. These were the most battle-hardened leaders of the Dominion, veterans of 100 wars. And yet, at this moment, none of them could hide the sheer dread in their eyes. "Status report," Zarvoth commanded. His top strategist, Admiral Voknar, exhaled sharply before speaking. "The enemy ship has entered high orbit. We are detecting multiple energy signatures from its hull, but our scanners, they don't recognize any of them." The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. "Meaning?" A science officer hesitated. "Meaning, we have no idea how their weapons work. We don't know how their defenses operate. We don't even know what kind of energy their ship is using." Zarvoth clenched his jaw. It was one thing to face an enemy with greater numbers. It was another thing entirely to face an enemy that defied understanding. He turned his gaze to the massive projection of Varalos Prime's defenses. The sky was filled with warships, their shields linked together in a massive planetary defense grid. The orbital weapons platforms hovered like silent sentinels, their cannons already aimed at the Revenant. Even if this ship was powerful, even if it had wiped out the First Armada, nothing could withstand the firepower of an entire empire's capital world. The Revenant attacks, the first shot fired from Varalos Prime, was from a Leviathan-class planetary cannon, a weapon so powerful that it could punch through a moon in a single blast, a superheated beam of raw energy, brighter than the sun itself, lanced up from the planet's surface, targeting the human warship. It struck true, or so they thought. But instead of damaging the Revenant, the beam bent. The energy coiled around the ship, as if space itself had been folded. The attack vanished, completely nullified. A stunned silence filled the war room. Then the Revenant retaliated. The moment its weapons activated, the Dominion's fleets understood something horrifying. They weren't fighting technology. They were fighting something else entirely. The first wave of destruction was nearly imperceptible. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Just a low hum across all Dominion warships. And then, ships began vanishing. No explosions, no debris, no energy readings. They simply ceased to exist. Entire formations blinked out of reality, as if the universe itself had erased them. "What is that?" Admiral Voknar stammered, watching in horror as 1/5 of his entire fleet disappeared in an instant. One of his officers frantically scanned the data. "This isn't a traditional energy weapon. There's no detonation, no heat signature. These ships are just being removed from existence." Zarvoth gritted his teeth. He had heard rumors before, whispers of humanity's scientific advancements, quantum disruption fields, dimensional destabilization weapons, theories that no other species had ever been able to turn into reality. And yet, here it was, in the form of a single ship, the unstoppable force. The Revenant was moving closer now, weaving through the Dominion's warships with surgical precision. It wasn't fighting like a normal ship. It was dancing through the battlefield, its movements unnatural, as if its pilot already knew exactly where every enemy shot would be fired before it even happened. Zarvoth's chest tightened. They were fighting something far worse than just a warship. This was an executioner, and it was playing with them. One of the Revenant's weapons activated again, this time targeting the planet itself. A single dark energy pulse descended from the warship, striking the planet's outermost shield, and the entire defense grid collapsed in a single heartbeat. Not shattered, not overloaded. The shields were simply gone, as if they had never been there in the first place. Inside the war chambers, everyone went deathly silent. For the first time in history, Varalos Prime was defenseless. Supreme Chancellor Zarvoth exhaled shakily. "Open a direct channel to the human ship," he finally ordered. A tense silence filled the room as the communication request was sent. The Revenant didn't respond, not at first. For a moment, it felt like they were screaming into the void itself. Then, the holographic display flickered to life, and the face of a human appeared. A man in a dark uniform, his expression cold, unreadable. His eyes pierced through the screen, as if he was looking straight into their souls. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He simply spoke. "This is Commander Elias Kane of the Revenant. Your Empire's time is over." Zarvoth stiffened, keeping his expression neutral. He took a breath, then spoke carefully. "If it is war you want, then know that the Dominion does not fall easily." Kane's face remained unmoved. "This isn't a war," he said. "This is the consequence of your actions." Zarvoth's breath caught in his throat. There was something terrifying about the absolute certainty in Kane's voice. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't conquest. This was judgment. The Revenant tilted, downward, its weapons now locked onto the planet itself, and in that moment, Zarvoth knew that nothing in the universe could stop what was coming next. The war chamber of Varalos Prime had fallen into a dead silence. Every screen, every holographic display, and every sensor feed was dominated by a single image, the Revenant, hanging motionless above the Dominion's capital world. For centuries, the Dominion had been the unchallenged force in the galaxy. Empires had crumbled before its fleets. Entire species had been wiped from existence under its rule. And yet, in this moment, facing this lone human warship, they felt something that no Dominion ruler had ever experienced before. Powerlessness. Supreme Chancellor Zarvoth struggled to keep his breathing steady. His mind raced, searching for any possible strategic option. Could they stall? Could they negotiate? Could they fight back? A deep, sinking feeling in his gut told him the answer was no. He lifted his gaze back to the holographic transmission, where Commander Elias Kane remained unmoving, his expression a mask of absolute certainty. "What do you want?" Zarvoth finally asked, his voice measured, careful. Kane did not hesitate. "Justice." The answer sent a cold ripple through the war chamber. Zarvoth knew, in that instant, that this was not a negotiation. There would be no demands, no terms, no diplomatic maneuvering. This human had already decided. Zarvoth forced himself to remain calm. "You misunderstand, Commander. The Dominion is prepared to—" Kane cut him off. "Your empire murdered billions. You conquered, enslaved, and exterminated entire civilizations. Your fleets burned entire star systems to enforce your rule." His voice was calm, but behind it, there was something colder than hatred, something that terrified even the Dominion's highest leaders. "You thought no one would come for you. You thought you could rewrite history with blood and fire. But history remembers, Chancellor. And so do we." The lights in the war chamber flickered. The holographic displays glitched for a moment, distorting into unreadable static. It wasn't a technical failure. It was the Revenant. Even through the transmission, its presence was warping the very fabric of reality around them. One of the officers at the edge of the room stumbled back, his breathing ragged. "We have to surrender. We have to—" "Silence," Zarvoth snarled, his voice cracking under the pressure. But deep down, he knew the officer was right. The doomed counterattack, despite the growing panic in the war chamber, the Dominion's military instinct took over. Even in the face of annihilation, they had been trained to respond with force. Across Varalos Prime, every remaining military installation went into overdrive. Planetary shields attempted to reboot. Orbital cannons realigned their targeting. Systems. Deep beneath the surface, a hidden subterranean command network prepared an emergency counterattack. It was a desperate, futile effort. From a hidden bunker kilometers underground, Dominion Admiral Velk Ran clenched his mandibles as he activated the last remaining superweapon of Varalos Prime. Fire the Quantum Annihilator. At the heart of the planet, a forbidden weapon, one of the Dominion's most terrible creations, awakened. A device that could collapse matter itself, erasing its target from existence at the quantum level. A single shot could shatter a planet, reducing it to cosmic dust, and they had aimed it at the Revenant. Annihilation. Denied. The weapon fired. A lance of violet-black energy surged toward the Revenant, twisting through the atmosphere like a spear forged from the very fabric of destruction. Itself. For a moment it seemed as if the Dominion had found their salvation. The weapon had destroyed entire moon-sized dreadnoughts in past wars. Surely not even the Revenant could survive this. But then, the beam stopped, not because it had hit a shield, not because it had been countered by some unseen force. It simply ceased to exist, as if the very concept of its existence had been rewritten by something far beyond Dominion comprehension. Zarvoth's eyes widened in pure horror. The Revenant had done nothing to defend itself. And yet, the Dominion's most powerful weapon had simply failed to exist. It wasn't invulnerable. It was something more. Something beyond reality. Something that was no longer bound by the same physical laws that governed the rest of the galaxy. Zarvoth's voice was barely a whisper. "What? Are you?" Kane's eyes darkened. "The future. And your past coming to collect." The Revenant's hull began to glow, its surface rippling like liquid metal. A gravitational anomaly began to form in the space surrounding it, distorting light, time, and space itself. It was about to unleash something the Dominion could not possibly understand, and then it struck. The fall of Varalos Prime. The Dominion's capital planet had stood for over 2,000 years, its towers scraping the heavens, its cities sprawling across entire continents. Its fall took less than a single minute. There was no explosion, no fire, no debris, no planetary fragments hurled into space. The moment the Revenant's attack connected, Varalos Prime simply began to fade, city by city, structure by structure, person by person, as if the planet itself was being unwritten from reality. From the Dominion's fleet, surviving captains could only watch in helpless horror as their homeworld simply ceased to be. No sound, no scream, just erasure. Inside the war chamber, Zarvoth fell to his knees, staring at his hands as they began to dissolve, his own body being stripped from existence along with the world he had ruled. His last thought was not of victory, nor of defeat. It was of fear, not just for himself, but for the Dominion as a whole. Because if humanity could erase an entire capital world with a single warship, then the rest of the Empire was already doomed. The Revenant's departure, as the last remnants of Varalos Prime vanished into the void, the Revenant hovered in absolute silence. There was no celebration, no declaration of conquest, no grand speech, just silence. Inside the warship, Kane turned away from the display, his expression unchanged. The mission was complete. There was no need to linger. Without a single word, the Revenant turned, vanishing into the depths of space. And the Dominion's greatest world, its heart, its seat of power, was now nothing more than an empty void where a planet had once been. It had taken them centuries to build their empire, and in one battle, humanity had begun its end. The destruction of Varalos Prime sent shockwaves across the entire Dominion. For the first time in its history, the great empire was leaderless, directionless, and truly afraid. The heart of the Dominion had not been conquered. It had not been bombed. It had not even been defeated. It had been erased. Across the Dominion's remaining worlds, panic erupted. Billions of Dominion citizens, once raised to believe in the invincibility of their empire, now found themselves scrambling for answers. Who had survived? Who was in charge now? Would the humans come for them next? In the wake of Varalos Prime's disappearance, Dominion fleets scrambled to re-establish military order. Across thousands of systems, fleets repositioned, outposts were reinforced, and entire populations were evacuated from strategically vulnerable locations. The Dominion had always been prepared for war. But this was not war. This was annihilation on a scale they had never imagined possible. The emergence of Supreme Warlord. Craxus, from the chaos, a new figure rose to power. Supreme Admiral Craxus Veltor, one of the highest-ranking military officers of the Dominion, seized control in the absence of the ruling council. Craxus was no politician. He was a warrior, forged through centuries of brutal campaigns. He had conquered entire sectors, crushed rebellions with an iron fist, and commanded fleets that had razed entire worlds. But never, never had he faced an enemy like this. From the safety of Zorthar 9, a fortified Dominion warworld, Craxus assembled the largest remaining Dominion fleet in history. 4,000 warships, 12,000 escort vessels, hundreds of super-capital dreadnoughts, the largest force the Dominion had ever gathered in one place. It was not just a fleet, it was a statement, a message to the rest of the galaxy that the Dominion was not finished, that they would not go down without a fight. The hunt for the Revenant Craxus knew that if the Dominion was to survive, it had to strike first. For all its fearsome power, the Revenant was still just one ship, and that meant it could be hunted. Operation Divine Reckoning Craxus deployed every intelligence resource, every last spy, every remaining Dominion agent to track the Revenant. Through black market sources, intercepted communications, and analysis of distortions in space-time, they discovered something critical. The Revenant had emerged in a desolate system on the outskirts of the galaxy, in a sector long abandoned by the Dominion. It was alone. Craxus saw an opportunity. The full might of the Dominion's remaining forces would descend upon it. Not to fight it, but to end it. The ambush. At the edge of a dying star system, the Revenant drifted through the void, silent as death. From the bridge, Commander Elias Kane observed the wreckage of what had once been a thriving colony. Destroyed long ago by the Dominion, it was a graveyard, a place where the Dominion had committed one of its first great atrocities. It was fitting, then, that this would be where the Dominion would fall. As Kane studied the remnants of the colony, the Revenant's sensors detected movement. A fleet. No. An armada. The Dominion had arrived. Craxus had not sent a strike force. He had sent everything. The might of the Dominion. The stars themselves dimmed as the Dominion's fleet emerged from hyperspace. Thousands of warships, dreadnoughts larger than cities, super-capital ships capable of shattering moons. And in the center of it all, aboard the flagship Devourer, Supreme Warlord Craxus stood at the command deck, staring down at the lone human warship. This was it. The moment where the Dominion would reclaim its place as the galaxy's greatest power, or be destroyed forever. Craxus raised a clawed fist, and with a single command, fire. The Revenant's true power, the void ignited. 1,000 beams of energy lanced toward the Revenant. Torpedoes screamed through the darkness. Space-time buckled as the Dominion unleashed every weapon they had. And then, it stopped. Not because the Revenant had dodged. Not because it had activated shields. The Dominion's entire attack simply ceased to exist. The battlefield fell silent. Craxus blinked, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The Dominion's weapons had not missed. They had not been blocked. They had simply been erased. The wrath of humanity. And then, the Revenant moved. Not in a way that any Dominion warship had ever moved. It did not accelerate. It did not engage thrusters. It simply appeared where it needed to be. One moment, it was in front of the fleet. The next, it was inside it. From the Revenant's hull, something awakened. A pulse of impossible energy surged outward, and every Dominion vessel within range simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris, no fire or wreckage, just emptiness. Craxus watched in mute horror as entire sections of his fleet simply vanished. The Revenant was not a warship. It was something else. Something beyond comprehension. Something that should not exist, and it was wiping them out. The last stand, the Dominion had never retreated, they had never surrendered. But for the first time in history, a Dominion fleet broke. Warships fled in every direction, captains screaming in panic as they tried to outrun the inevitable. But there was no escape. The Revenant did not chase them. It did not fire weapons. It simply unmade them. Craxus, still aboard the Devourer, could do nothing but watch. His empire was dying before his eyes. And then, Kane's voice echoed across the Dominion's communication channels. Your empire ends today. The Revenant pulsed once more, and the Dominion's greatest fleet ceased to be. A galaxy holds its breath. News of the cataclysmic battle at Zorthar 9 spread across the stars faster than light itself. The Dominion's grandest fleet, their final hope, had not merely been defeated, it had been erased. Across the galaxy's countless civilizations, silence fell as the realization set in. The Dominion, the eternal empire, the unshakable conquerors, were no more. For centuries, their shadow had loomed over the stars. For centuries, entire species had bowed before them, sacrificing their sovereignty to avoid annihilation. For centuries, no one had dared to challenge them outright. Now, their war fleets were dust, their leaders dead, and their homeworld gone. In the wake of the Revenant's wrath, billions across the Dominion's remaining territories waited, trembling in uncertainty. Would the humans come for them next? Would the Revenant burn every last Dominion world? Would the galaxy be reshaped by a new ruler? Humanity? No one knew. And in that uncertainty, chaos began to spread. The collapse begins. Without its ruling council, without its military backbone, the Dominion fractured overnight. Worlds once enslaved by the Dominion rose up in rebellion. Planetary governors, once fiercely loyal to the Empire, declared independence rather than face humanity's wrath. On distant colony worlds, entire Dominion, legions deserted, abandoning their posts as fear overtook them. Some fleets, leaderless and desperate, tried to flee into uncharted space, hoping to outrun the inevitable. Others, deluded by arrogance, still believed the Dominion could survive. Among them were fanatics, warlords who refused to accept reality. They called for a holy war, vowing to fight until their last breath. They did not know that their time had already run out. The final Dominion bastion, deep within Sector Zal Tarun, on a fortress world known as Vakarus, the last remnants of the Dominion's high command gathered. This was the Dominion's last stronghold, a world fortified by planetary shields, anti-fleet cannons, and legions of elite soldiers. Here, the last of the warlords convened. Their once proud, gilded banners were now tattered and burned. Their once unshakable confidence was now fractured and fragile. And above them, in the void of space, a black sun appeared. The Revenant had come. The Revenant's arrival from the surface of Vakarus. The last Dominion warlords watched in horror as a tier in reality formed above their world. The Revenant did not arrive via hyperspace. It simply manifested. A vessel beyond understanding, shaped like a ghost of war, its surface glowing with ancient energies, far beyond anything the Dominion could comprehend. And then, the sky shattered. A power beyond imagination. The planetary defenses of Vakarus activated immediately. Planetary annihilator cannons locked onto the Revenant. Supercapital warships built as the Dominion's last hope opened fire. Orbital defense grids unleashed entire barrages of high-energy plasma. It was the most powerful planetary defense system ever built, and none of it mattered. The Revenant's wrath with a pulse, the Revenant rewrote reality itself. The planet's shields, the proudest technological achievement of the Dominion, simply vanished. The warships in orbit, they did not explode. They did not burn. They simply ceased to exist. One moment, they were there. The next, they were not. And then, the surface of Vakarus itself began to change. The fall of Vakarus, the Dominion warlords, now pale with terror, turned to their last hope: escape. But there was nowhere to run. Their own palaces, their own strongholds, were disintegrating around them. The very fabric of their world was collapsing. In the final moments of Vakarus, Supreme Warlord Drektal, the last high-ranking ruler of the Dominion, stood before the burning remains of his war room. His eyes, once filled with pride, now held only dread. He stared at the skies, where the Revenant loomed like a god of death, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what fear was. Last message as the Dominion crumbled, a transmission was broadcast across all known space. It was Kane's voice, and he spoke not just to the Dominion's remnants, but to the entire galaxy. Your empire is dead. Your reign of terror ends today. This is your judgment. This is the price you pay for centuries of suffering. Humanity does not forgive. Humanity does not forget. To those who still wish to stand against us, take one last look at the Dominion. This is what awaits you. The galaxy listened. They heard the final cries of the Dominion, and they knew. This was not just the end of an empire. This was the beginning of something new. The silence that followed. And then, the Revenant vanished. No war fleets followed in its wake. No human armies occupied the Dominion's broken territories. No conquest. No occupation. Only silence. The age of the Dominion had ended, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The aftermath of Annihilation. For the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy was without a ruling power. The Dominion had been a colossus, an empire so vast and so ancient that many believed it would never fall, yet, in the span of mere weeks, it had been reduced to ruins. Vakarus, the last stronghold of the Dominion, was erased from the star charts. The warlords who had once commanded entire legions of warships were now nothing more than scattered fugitives, desperately trying to hide from the vengeance of their former slaves. Entire armadas, once symbols of unstoppable might, were now drifting lifeless in space, their crews either dead or surrendering to the inevitable. The galaxy had witnessed something impossible. Not only had the humans returned, but they had done so with a force beyond comprehension. And now, with the Dominion's fall, an even greater question loomed. What happens next? Would humanity claim the throne? Would they forge an empire greater than the Dominion? Would they enforce their will upon the countless civilizations that now trembled in the void? The answer was not what anyone expected. Humanity's choice in the weeks following the Dominion's collapse, a fleet of human warships, smaller than the Revenant but still terrifyingly advanced, arrived at key points across the galaxy. They did not conquer. They did not occupy. They did not demand fealty. Instead, they did something unheard of. They freed the enslaved worlds and left them to rule themselves. Where once Dominion governors had ruled with an iron fist, humanity established councils of independence, ensuring that each world could determine its own fate. Where once fleets had been forced into endless wars, humanity decommissioned Dominion warships and left them to be repurposed for defense. Where once fear had been the only constant, humanity brought order. The Galactic Summit was at the ancient neutral world of Zaltaran, long forgotten due to Dominion censorship, that humanity made its intentions clear. Leaders from over 200 star nations arrived, expecting to be given terms of surrender, expecting humanity to claim dominion over all. Instead, they were given a choice. Kane himself, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, addressed the assembly. For centuries you feared the Dominion because you thought they were inevitable. You believed that nothing could stop them, that they were eternal. We have proven that nothing is eternal, except the will to be free. Humanity will not take the Dominion's throne. We did not come back to rule. We came back to ensure no empire like the Dominion ever rises again. You now have the opportunity to build something better. A free galaxy, a united galaxy. Not under human rule, but under your own terms. The room was silent. No one had expected this. Not even humanity's oldest allies. In all of history, power had only ever been taken, never given away. And yet here was a civilization so powerful it could rewrite the laws of war, choosing not to rule. The birth of the Concordat. The days that followed, a new alliance was formed. The Galactic Concordat. Not an empire, not a dominion, but a council of equals, dedicated to ensuring that tyranny would never again return to the stars. At its core were former Dominion slave worlds, long oppressed species that had suffered for generations, but also joining them were former Dominion members, species who had been forced into war but now sought redemption, and standing alongside them was humanity, not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as guardians, the final fate of the Revenant. But while the galaxy began to heal, one question remained unanswered. What of the Revenant? It had appeared from nowhere, destroyed an empire that had lasted millennia, and then vanished. Many feared it would return, that it was merely waiting. Some believed it was humanity's secret superweapon, to be unleashed again if the Concordat ever failed. But the truth was far stranger. The Revenant had never truly belonged to humanity. It had been built in exile, in the void between the stars, away from any known system. Its technology was not just human engineering. It was something far older, something woven from the knowledge of lost civilizations. And after its final mission was complete, it disappeared into the darkness from which it had come, never to be seen again. Epilogue. A new era begins. The galaxy had changed forever. The Dominion was dead. The age of fear was over. For the first time in millennia, the stars were free. And as humanity stepped back from absolute power, they left behind a simple message, a warning, a promise, a truth that the galaxy would never forget. We are humanity. We will not rule you. We will not control you. But if tyranny ever rises again, if another empire dares to take what is not theirs, know this. We will return, and the stars will burn before we let it stand. And so, under the light of 1,000 suns, a new era began. An era not of war, but of possibility. Not of conquest, but of unity. Not of fear, but of hope. The age of the Dominion was over, and the age of the Concordat had begun.